Really like to thank everybody for coming out. I had hoped to do this in Valdez, where you'd have a video there and people could come to the museum and gather and do the presentation. And things didn't turn out that way. So I've given this presentation in Spokane. I've also given it in North Bend. I've made some modifications for it for Valdez. So before I get started, I really want to acknowledge the museum. They've been an important part of my life when I lived there, from Avalanche talks to art show to book signings. I remember doing a slideshow there in 1985 in the museum with an old-fashioned in the museum, and we had to scramble to find a screen because they didn't have a screen. So how things have changed. They've recorded a lot of history in regards to the mountains. You can, even with photographs from Post, all the way up through Washburn, mountain exploration in the 70s, beginning with Vin Homan, and then that all transpired into the age of Coombs and Cummings and beyond. In 1976, John Krakauer published the book Into the Wild, and it was a story of a young man drawn to Alaska, like so many of us here this evening, looking for adventures. And I won't go into the particulars of the story, but basically it didn't end too well for the gentleman and Christopher McCandless. And my story is a little bit of that and a little bit of the opposite. And I like to think I made it out of the country or out of the wild. This basic outline tonight, I think all of you have get an idea of that. I'm going to go through history really quick so I can get to Avalanche talk. So came to Alaska in the late 70s in the Coast Guard. This is the first picture of me taking Alaska, just at Unimak Pass. I was on a Coast Guard cutter, and I was a navigator on the ship. And part of what I learned on that was weather observation. So doing hourly weather observation it was part of my skill rate to not only be in the navigation, but have a background in basic meteorology. Little did I know that that was going to come in very handy in the future. After a stint in the Bering Sea, or Alaska meant a lot. On my first port stop in Juneau, Alaska, the first thing I did was on my shore leave was go to the top of Mount Juneau. So I was all in on coming to Alaska and being in the wild. Came time for transfer off the ship. I saw a picture very similar to this one I took from an airplane. It was a picture of Valdez, except it was all white, and it was a reconnaissance photo, and it was you take that picture, it was all white. So that sounded good for me. I've been in Port Angeles, Washington. That didn't seem remote enough. Valdez seemed even more remote. So I was all in on coming to Valdez and to Avalanche awareness presentations. I met people that were here. It was very infantile at the time as far as backcountry stuff. The only thing that was really going on was some ice climbing, and a couple of the ice climbers skied. So, I tried to hang out with them and get them to mentor me along. Avalanches were a big thing early on. My second winter, there's a big avalanche incident up on the other side of the Sena River. There's the article, and I won't go too much into the history on that. It'd be just some of the excitement of the time. Agencies feud over avalanche control. So avalanches were always a big part of everything that was going on in Valdez. As I got to know people, I got into doing ski expeditions. I did across the Chugach, and this is my group of people. We took off from Eureka Lodge. All of these people were from Valdez. There's Bob Pekka and John Weiland, myself in the middle, and Father Mike Shields and Karen Babcock. It took us 7 days skiing Valdez or Eureka Lodge to Valdez. Following year or two, we went up, did a traverse around the top of Valdez up to Mount Chaplina. We climbed Mount Chaplina and then came down the Valdez Glacier. into Valdez. And we had to ski all the way to the airport when we got off the Valdez Glacier because the road wasn't plowed. So that's where the nearest phone was. During the 80s and up until the Extreme Ski Championships in Valdez, I was pretty much abandoned expedition skiing or ice climbing. It really didn't attract me as much as just going backcountry skiing. And I was into having skins and skis and just going out and touring around Thompson Pass and learning how to ski. By the mid 80s, I had bought land in Thompson Pass at Hayden View and immediately started building a chalet because I had the desire to guide there someday. And of course, a few years later, I got the biggest marketing help I could ever have with the World Extreme Ski Championships being held in my backyard. During the 90s, I started putting out ski reports out of Valdez with avalanche conditions and stuff like that. Started doing that, and and during that time there was it was pretty technical business doing avalanche reports. And I saw a guy down in Utah drawing his information for the Utah Avalanche Center in a fashion such as this, instead of the traditional graph that you would see posted. It was kind of complicated, but it was easier to understand. But I thought this presentation of the snowpack was a lot better than the more technical profiles that people produce for avalanche work. There's a lot of resistance to this. Generally, people wanted things more technical, but it's kind of interesting because this pit is now, this type of style is pretty common in avalanche centers, and you see this type of profile more often than you see a more technical full pit profile. By the way, this is the pit profile from a week or so, a couple days before the Damalanche hit. I had gone up in Thompson Pass and dug the pit, and you can see the depth of the snow and the problem layers and why that avalanche came down in multiple events, climaxing with the slide all the way to the ground at the bottom there, designated by the yellow weak layer. So that was the pit profile prior to the Damalanche. Valdez has done pretty good. We had a lot of fatalities. I wouldn't say a lot of fatalities, but we had fatalities going into the 90s. But since then, Valdez has done pretty good. I'm not there anymore, but it seems like because of ongoing forecasting, ongoing education, ongoing outreach by not only the community in Valdez, their avalanche folks, but also in other areas of the state, has really done a lot to do this. The other thing is Valdez people live in a lot of snow. So you learn a lot about snow. So I think that innate knowledge that you accumulate living there over time is really helpful. One of the best joys I had was always seeing other people come to Valdez new and explore and see the mountains. And I have skied with a lot of people. In fact, it's kind of ironic that people I met in 1992 used to think I was the old mentor because I had been skiing there for 20 years, but now a lot of you have been skiing there for 20 years. And so now you're the mentors. So in my time in Valdez, about 1,000 feet of snow. That's what I kind of calculated, and about 2,750 days of skiing. This is basically a graph of my progression, days skiing, the year, and some of the events I'm going to go into detail a little bit on. Snow Dome early on, and then a couple of events later on after 2005. These are incidents, okay? The first one was Snow Dome in 1984. I'm going to refer just slightly to my notes here a little bit. And I always say this was lack of experience, lack of education, and ignoring basic clues. All of you are familiar with snow. So I'm going to go through these incidences fairly quickly. You can kind of see follow the graph there of what happened. Yellow line is going up. You kind of get some general descriptions and layout of the area. I'll leave that up there for just a little bit later, a few more seconds. So April, 5 caught, 4 partial barriers, 1 injured, 1 deceased dog. Everybody knows the route. We had recently discovered Larsons Notch, and so that gave us access to the upper Snow Dome. This is the day going up. It was very warm that day, probably similar to what I'm seeing in this picture here, taken in later years. We were seeing avalanche signs everywhere, but we had our beacons, we had everything, but we really didn't know what we were doing. Okay. You go up, it's just beautiful. It's just entrancing to hike up there and ski. You're just drawn to it. Okay, now these are pictures from the actual event itself. I was always carrying my Yashica FX2 box around with me. It was slide film in it, so I took lots of pictures. And this is Pat Levy and Chris Larson. You can see how hot it is. On April 6th, we're up high. We have our shirts off and we're chugging water. Here you can see, I think this is Brian Teal busting the trail after we left our skis up toward the summit. You can see we're wallowing in deep snow. We had been kicking off pinwheels all the way off, kicking off our own avalanches. Everything was primed for human error. This is taken from about the same spot on the way down. You can see at this point, you can use that rock as a reference. We were all 5 of us were within about 20 feet of each other post-holing up this slope, just above the rock. And I had just put my hand on that rock when the slope busted, and everybody got swept down toward this, following the shadow line to the left. And I held onto the rock, and I didn't get swept. So this is what happened. That's where the avalanche happened. And when it was over with, everybody was kind of right down underneath me on the ridge, kind of getting out of the snow and digging themselves out. Nobody was buried, but we were missing Chris Larson, and he had been swept over the side and landed way down there where you see the bottom red arrow. I got a fate beacon, but it was pretty bad. We weren't in very good shape. We were all pretty shook up. We started hiking down. We didn't know where he was. We got down a little bit lower on the ridge, and we looked back and we saw him out on the snow. And so we hustled out to him, and he was in trauma. He was kind of broken up, hypothermia. His dog was right next to him with a broken neck. All the ski gear was right there, his glasses, his pack. He didn't lose anything. Bob Pekka and Brian Teal took care of him, while Pat Levy and I skied out. And we skied out in 2 different directions. Pat Levy skied back the way we came in. I didn't like that way because it was getting sun that late in the day. So I took off down this way, which you see in the picture. And we both got to Alyeska about the same time, oddly enough, to get a phone call and an airplane or a helicopter to come in and whisk them off the mountain just at sunset. Chris had some trauma and stuff like that. He was pretty busted up, but he left the hospital, I think, the next day. Interesting look at the weather at the time. See, the white line is the day of occurrence, but what really stands out is how warm it was and how the overnight temperatures had not reached below freezing. So obviously we had picked a really, really bad day to be up in the mountains. But if you look at the previous days, there had been a lot of overcast and snow. So there's a little bit of that human factor where you get a clear break and you want to get out on the first sunny day. So lots of error on that one. Make the news, and then you move on. So I did pretty good for a long time, and kept myself pretty safe. Never had any more incidences of note, and continued educating, reading and being out in the snow and doing my avalanche work and being concerned about that. In 2006, Leprechaun, which all of you are familiar with when you drive over Thompson Pass, a beautiful summit. It always entertained me. I would always wanted to do it. I had plans, and I had skied up Snowslide Gulch right from the highway, and had explored some of the steeper couloirs coming off the Pocket Glacier under the peak, and had been up there a couple of times. Very good skiing in the Big Bowl when it's safe, of course. You know, it's not a place you want to ski a lot. A place called Snowslide Gulch. But I found another way in that took me away from all that hazard on the approach of just straight shooting up. Snowslide Gulch was a heavy snow year. I just dropped over the bridge. There was enough snow to crawl along the bank here, get rid of your skis, and then you could just pretty much post hole and then put your skis back on, kick turn, and get up on where I took this orange line from. The black line is the approach I used to use before to go in. And you can see it took a lot of timing and a lot of exposure, and was just kind of too much exposure for that area. So I created this new route, and that got me up on the bench and around onto the south aspect. I really didn't intend to do this day. I brought only a quart of water. I really didn't anticipate doing it, but the route kept delivering good angles and good snow. As I progressed around, I wanted to head tighter to the summit. And at this point in my experience, I had done what a lot of other avalanche people do, is they come out with their own little formula. You can see formulas posted daily in avalanche journals on websites. This is the formula I use. Well, I had a 1, 2, 3. 3 strikes, you're out. 3 clues, you're gone. And, you know, like if you wake up in the morning and the Avalanche Center says considerable avalanche danger, well, that's 1 strike. Okay, I go out, I'm driving up to Thompson Pass, I see natural activity. That's 2 strikes. But I like to think that a lot of us have enough skills where we can push those limits and negotiate those hazards and still accomplish some good skiing. So as I got to the top of the Snowslide Gulch, I started going up. The first red line, I went up, huge whoomp. The whole area just exploded underneath me. It didn't slide, but it was actually stunning to feel. And so I've been checking my angles really closely. Everything was 25 to 30 right in here where I was going up. And so I backed off and thought about it, and I thought, well, I'll just keep going around. And I went a little further and went up and got another big whoomp. And at this time I was pretty much, so I just kept poking, and I found stability, found good snow, and made it to the top. I had to melt snow in my water bottle to make more snow. So I had this trick where I'd have a full quart of water, and when it was half full, I would pack it full of snow and shake it up really good and turn all that to, it would all turn to liquid with another half snow. And I'd actually refill the water bottle with that trick. Valdez is warm enough, you can do it there. So this is on the summit of Leprechaun. Snowslide Gulch, all of you are familiar with it. Again, here's confirmation of how dangerous it is. Skeed In, took a picture down it. Yeah, very significant event. So I bring that up, that as not as an incident, but as a way you negotiate how you can challenge yourself. You have rules. If you have confidence in what you're doing, just be really careful and be careful out there. So, Gunsight. Gunsight is very experienced educators, a forecaster. All the experts are on hand for this one. Gunsight Mount. I don't have a lot of pictures of this incident, but I had guided a guy, and he was going back to Anchorage. He had stayed with us, and he was a telemark skier. And I said, well, you know, the weather's good. Maybe I've always wanted to do Gunsight, so let's go do that on the way back. I'll drive over there with you. And we had some other people, and there were the Daigle brothers from the Utah Avalanche Center, another guy I had guided, and myself. So there's like 5 or 6 in the party. We hustled up the summit pretty nicely. They were all going to Anchorage. I was going to leave, go back to Valdez. And we got to the top, and they wanted to drop over the other side down towards Sheep Mountain Lodge. And I tried to dissuade them, just like, you know, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't know what's down there. I can't give you any more information. I have no idea. I mean, I looked down there, and it was just kind of this very complicated egress with lots of features in it. So they said they wanted to do it, and me and my telly buddy, we turned around and we said, okay, well, we'll drive. We'll ski down. We'll drive around, pick you guys up, and bring you back to the trailhead when you exit. And so we skied down, and we waited and waited, and we didn't see them, and they never came out that way. So we went back to the car, and then we see them skiing down the up route that we had skied down. I got down to the car. Well, they had skied down there, and promptly 2 of them got caught in small slabs that broke for a short distance and rolled them through some rocks. And one guy had a bead hand. And so, yeah, things happen to even experts sometimes. Okay. Goodwills. This is my nightmare that continues to haunt me even to this day. So when you go somewhere and you're skiing, you got to consult the book. There it is. It's on the ski guide book. I even put in the word chasm a couple times in my guidebook. I'm just highlighting them here in the guidebook as a difficulty and something you should be aware of on skiing up into Moonlight Basin. This is just basically what chasms look like, or chasms. So on this day, I was with Sam Owen. We were going up to Goodwill's, and we were going to come down the other side. And I'm sure you all have looked at that slope. It's pretty mellow. It's got a long run out. It's a beautiful ski. You can get 3,500 feet of glorious ski, and you go do it again. But I never skied all the way down to see how it egressed. And I thought, well, we could ski all the way down, and then we could just maybe ski up the gully there, ski up the chasm and exit. Although that had some risk involved. Or we could just skin right back up and around it if we needed to, something I had done before. Skiing off the summit, spectacular as usual. Then we get down and we ski the whole line, and we get down to this point where we're down in the hole that's right under the parking lot there at the trailhead at the hairpin. If you walk out there far enough, you can look down, you'll probably see that patch of water. And I came up on it here. It looks like Sam went around the other way, the safer way. And I decided to take the more risk way by traversing across this small slab here. And it looks like I went up and I tried one way, and then I changed my mind and either went higher or lower. And then I traversed across it, and the whole patch of snow there, you see with the rock at, took me down onto the water on a floating chunk of snow. And you can see what was left of the chunk of snow is in the water there. And this was a deep roiling hole that exited and went down into Hayden Canyon. And I got, fortunately enough, I was able to get my ski poles flipped around. I stuck them in the snowbank and kind of crawled for my life and got myself anchored as quickly as I could before the snow had melted out from underneath me. And this is just a picture of me afterwards where I crawled myself out and got my pack on my back. And then we just kind of hiked straight up to the parking lot there at the hairpin corner. So yeah, that was a real close call. And I still think about that incident. So I started with a really big avalanche, and then I end with the smallest avalanche possible. Airbag might have been handy that day, huh? Yeah. Last ski, the last ski I did was really active. I went up to Thompson Pass, knowing it was going to be my last ski. Conditions were bad. Things had ripped overnight. The sun was busting out. All the common paths had broken loose with just odd looking ones. These little features down lower on the lowers had cascaded. Some of these I've skied very often, these little rollovers here. So my choice was to go to Little Odyssey because there's so many red flags, every aspect, all elevations. And I decided to go up Little Odyssey, and I looked across and I took a picture of this gigantic wet slide coming down off the south face of Tone's Temple that almost covered the whole valley. I could hear it. And when I got to I took this route to the top of Little Odyssey, pretty common. It was a good selection on a day like that. So keep your angles low and just get a good tour in. And like I always do, I just straight line right to the summit. Off the summit, I skied the little shadow snout there and dropped off of it, and the snow was really punky. I augured in, sat down, couldn't get anything to work. Very, very punky, the bad kind of snow. And when I got down to the bottom, I wasn't very happy with my last ski in Valdez, but when I drove around to kind of glass my line, I noticed I had triggered this avalanche all the way down the face of the slope, the shadow, as I call it. And yeah, so that's something I triggered right off my tail. It wasn't a remote. When I fell, I triggered it, but I was looking forward, and I didn't notice that right behind me, this had broken loose. And so on my last day, everything comes together. I make the right call, the right decisions. Be conservative. Lessons learned, I'll be real quick here. I'm a big fanatic on weather. If you're involved in any way in avalanche terrain, you should figure out some way to accumulate weather. When I was at Thompson Pass, I had a station, a bucket, and a snow stake in the backyard, track snow pretty closely. This is one of the deeper snowfalls out there. So in Spokane, I don't have a bucket that big when I'm measuring snow. It's a little bitty thing. It's not a big Valdez snow bucket, which is this bottom aluminum cylinder. So you maintain your own weather stations and opposite, keep some accurate snow logs, measure the snow depth where you're at. Every once in a while, take that pole out and get the total depth. You don't have to dig all the time, but just do something with the snow you're out on and record it. Coco Ross, didn't know about that till I got down here. I post on all my data. I still gather snow information here, though it's kind of minimal, but I'm able to do precipitation and be part of the national system and have a good relationship with the National Weather Service. They put out the best forecasts, National Weather Service. I don't use anything else but them. They have great spot forecasts. Their discussions, forecast discussions twice a day are really good. Airbags, trees, trauma, train traps, they don't do much good in those situations. Just like a beacon doesn't do any good in those situations. or does an avalanche do any good? So you have to manage this. Valdez doesn't have near the problem with trees because we have such excellent run out zones. So if something does happen, you're usually in a kind of an alluvial issue, and people manage terrain appropriately there and avoid train traps. But a big enough avalanche can cause trauma. Okay, no doubt about that. The hybrid paradox. I'm going to kind of walk around this issue a little bit here. This has to do with the mixing of skiing and sledding. And one of the issues is the amount of information you are accumulating in relation to your trip. So in this incident, this is, and again, all the decisions are involved in the incidents that I'm going to go into here a little bit. They're very complex, but all of them have a relationship with human error. I've had human error. I've looked at those complex situations and beat myself up pretty bad about it. In the hybrid paradox, you have backcountry skiers are able to take a sled in and pretty much come right up to your slope there with not a lot of information, not nearly as much information as you would get if you had maybe skied from the road or maybe stopped short of your destination and maybe done a shorter ski approach in versus parking at the highest point that you can get at with a sled, because you're really not getting a lot of information. I think what happened here, I'm not sure, they booted up and they parked their sled, booted up and triggered this slab. I don't think anybody was hurt, but probably a scary situation worth talking about and everything. But what's interesting is just right after, if you look in the picture, there's wind blowing off the top after the picture. So maybe that's something they missed on the way into the slope, or things like that. The more time in your approach, the more information you're going to get. So it's not saying that hybrid skiing is bad or good. It's giving you some ideas, some extra efforts you can do to make yourself safer out there if this is going to be your mode of travel. This is, I don't think I've shared these pictures with anybody. These are the incident with Jesse Toll in the mid-90s. Jesse and his dad had taken a snow machine, I believe, off a school bus and gone into the top of Gully 1. John parked his sled. His dad and Jesse got off the sled and went over and started booting up this slope where he triggered this very broad but shallow depth avalanche that buried and killed him. It was a very sad event. I skied up the next day, took this picture. It's an area I'm fairly familiar with. I've been up here a number of times. Yeah, you can see how long the trigger line is. Again, this is where more information with more time on the snow before you reach your information to get more information. This is the bed surface of that avalanche. You can see the very shallow avalanche, but and a shallow burial. So it doesn't take much. Again, this maybe it was a little thicker up at the top at the crown, but generally this slab was only 5 or 6 inches in depth. So in both of these incidences, and in most incidences, it's by approaching, you increase slab density with increasing elevation, which is very common in the complex terrain around Valdez, and where you're down booting up through good snow, and then suddenly it's harder and harder, and you're on a slab and booting up a slab, or vice versa. So I make this graphic just to give you some idea on on exposure, on risk. And I have heli skier, sled, backcountry skier, a snow bike, which is a new tool in the backcountry. I'm just generally using a common slope that gets steeper and the snow gets more dense. There's no slab at the bottom, but there's a slab at the top. If you look at exposure time, a heli skier, maybe 5 minutes of exposure at 10 to 30 miles an hour. I know some people I'm just using those generally. I know a lot of you ski a lot faster than that. So very, very little time in exposure in a hazarded area, very little time. Sled, 5 minutes on a high mark or just scouting up higher terrain, just your classic nice high mark up into the 30, 35 mile an hour terrain. Not this, we're just talking about a general slope here, 35 degrees, all things considered. We're not talking about the steepest terrain here. And a backcountry skier is moving along at about 1 to 2 miles an hour. And he's in that same terrain for 100 minutes. And he's poking all the way along there. Every one of those dots is a pole probe being alert for a slab. So at 2 miles an hour, it's pretty hard to not notice a slab. At 30 miles an hour, it's almost impossible to feel the slab. And then we move over here to snow bikes, which is the new complicated tool, is that they're able to do what a snow machine does, but they have these additional areas where they can zig and zag around, whereas a snow machine might be more committed after the turn to have to come down the fall line. Snow bikes aren't committed to the fall line like everybody else. They can move around and explore up around rocks and can spend quite a bit of time. And so this is a new tool. And like all of these areas, we have fatalities and most of them are from human error and such. So I'm just giving you this as a graphic to show you the different risk levels by user groups. It's something to build on. But I think what highlights here is, of course, the backcountry skier spending so much more time, not only exposed, which is a negative, but he's also spending a lot more time accumulating snowpack information. Just a simple review on slabs, the wedge slab issue. Yeah, it's very, very challenging. You get two kinds of slabs. You get a wedge slab like on the one on the bottom, and then you can get the one on the top, which is the one that worries me most is the bottom one, the wedge slab, which seems to catch a lot of people. But then again, you can have that upper slab, the perfectly square one, can set itself right down on the one on the bottom, and then it's even steeper and more problematic. So you can have a no-wind slab on top of a wedge slab. So I'm just trying to bring some graphics here of how slabs are developed along crest around the tops, how they fill in on gullies. So lastly, I want to talk a little bit about age risk, which is good. A few years ago, I started noticing, maybe it was 6 years ago, fatalities almost on an annual basis of people in their 60s, over 55 group, experienced people having issues in the background and resulting in fatalities. In 2006, there was only 4 people over 60, and only a couple handfuls over, and that's over 56 years. Only 4 fatalities. I think we've had a lot more than that in the last couple of years in that age group. So what we have is we have the boomers coming into who have been skiing for 30 years, and their exposure level is up. They've been out there a long time, and there's a lot more of them. So statistically, it's a lot more likely that we're going to see increased fatalities in all groups, but particularly noticeable would be in the older people. Now, the other thing to realize that, yeah, some guy who's 60 his exposure level could be the same as somebody who's 45, who's been skiing for 25 years. So, you know, this is just things to look out for as you become more experienced and you are older, that you're statistically more likely to make a human error. So how do you deal with that as you age, as you become a 50-year-old skier and you want to keep skiing safe? Well, complacency, the only real way to deal with complacency is you got to get out there and keep skiing. And you have to be attentive to all the things of the weather and doing the data and doing those core things to keep you safe out there. Another thing I'm going to recommend is if you haven't taken an avalanche class in a while, you need to take another one. I did. It was really refreshing. And I did it because I read the statistics. I started seeing this trend of people with 30 years of experience or over 60 increasing fatality deaths in those age groups. And so I encourage you, if you haven't taken an avalanche awareness class, I know there's a bunch of you like me out there that, you know, are in Anchorage or in Valdez or in Fairbanks. And the last avalanche course you took was maybe from Doug Fessler. Okay. It's time to go get educated again. Okay. So I encourage you all to take a level 2. If you took a level 2 10 years ago, go take it again. Even if you're 55 or 60, it's worth it. Again, the basic skills, ignoring obvious clues, 24-hour rule is just probably the most important thing for around Valdez. A 24-hour rule. You know, be careful on the weekends. Saturday morning, first bluebird day in a while, and Saturday morning. That's another recipe for fatalities in all across the U.S. But we've been doing pretty good this year. We've only had 8 fatalities in the United States this year, so we're doing pretty good. And so that ends my presentation. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing your experiences. The incidents and close calls you share show the value of asking, how much uncertainty do we have today? The more uncertainty, the larger margin of safety we must figure into our plan. Your guidebook has helped many people who come to Thompson Pass. Snow is the question, terrain is the answer. Avalanche forecasts for Valdez and local education. www.alaskasnow.org/Valdez.
Really?
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate that. That was
Hey,
from Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Just to remind people, you need to be making those contributions on their ski reports. You don't have to be a professional. If you're out in the field making observations, send it to them so they can have more information. They need that from you. Next.
I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Yes, I've only been skiing up here for 10 years or so, and it seems like in the last couple of years, I've noticed a lot more instabilities that were lingering and less what you would call green light conditions. I'm wondering if that's just anecdotal or if you noticed that from back in the day before, you know, climate change was more exacerbated. Did you notice a lot more stability in the early years you were here versus the later, or not really?
Well, what I noticed before I left was it seemed like chronic instabilities lingered at a depth, you know, that I guess what I'm saying is you're talking about a lot of instability deeper in the snowpack there being persistent. And that's something that is new, at least to me, because my experience in Valdez was that instability was always very acute. The next storm would come in and shake everything out and smash it down, clean out all the gullies, and everything would be all cleaned out. It seems like today you're getting lingering instabilities deeper in the snowpack with persistent layers. I've seen some of the pits and it's like, wow, that's really persistent, but it depends on where you are, you know. North of the pass is really challenging on the north side of the pass with deeper instability. There's such a transition zone there. So, you know, snow depth, snowpack, rain on snow probably is readily, you know, you can see that there, that it's raining more at lower elevations. So, yeah, but I don't understand what's going on there with persistent deep instability. No, that seems unusual.
Thank you.
Hey Matt, this is Sam Stark. I really enjoyed your book, and I'm new to Alaska, and I've read in your book and through your talk a lot of deep love and respect for Thompson Pass and skiing in this area. What brought you to leave, and what what drew you away from Alaska?
Well, it's a lot of timing. I you know, Valdez is a hard place to grow old in, as you know, and you know, I was just happy to leave alive in some respects. So I don't think so much about how and why I left, other than I'm glad I got out of the country, you know. So, but I was fortunate enough that I had scouted ahead and knew where I wanted to land. And I think I landed in a good place here in Spokane. They have a lot of really good skiing here. The ski lifts are cheapest in North America. And, you know, I couldn't be happier skiing right here, right now. I have really fond memories of Thompson Pass, and you know, that's for sure. But you know, sometimes it's time to move along, and that's what we did.
Yo, Matt, it's Jeremy Orbita here. We've had some kind of mediocre winter weather, and honestly haven't been skiing much this year up here. And so we've been watching a bunch of YouTube videos instead, the whole Cody Townsend 50 Peaks project. And he threw out this concept of, you know, as skiers, we tend to prioritize, you know, we talk a lot about these first descents, but, you know, he brings up this concept of a last descent. And I keep thinking about climate change and how it was just so common for us to ski across the port, for example, and it just is not coming in these days. And you know, I just wondering if you want to talk about that kind of last descent concept, perhaps. Well,
I can just, from what I was experiencing as I left and what I've seen since I left, you know, climate change has pretty much wiped out, you know, the Valdez arena of the guidebook. And because those routes used to go early and last long, and that's not that, you know, if you have a bad year, that's one thing. If you have two, it's a coincidence. But, you know, if you have 3 or 4 bad years at sea level with the rain and the temperatures you're seeing, that's a pattern. And so I don't know how you can deal with that. But on the other hand, Jeremy, I had the advantage of a lot of experience in Valdez. And so when the weather was good, or whether it was bad, or the snow was good, or whether it was bad, I had a lot of experience that took me to go ski in the right place a lot. And so, you know, all I can do is encourage you to keep poking around, learn the new climate, and learn the new areas, and continue pushing on. I see people are still making it up into Benzine Alley, but I see some of the pictures of brush on Sugarloaf, and, you know, considering all the rain that you've had, to see so much brush exposed is kind of alarming. Yeah. But February, I think, is the snowiest month, so remain optimistic. Okay. Valdez has is again, coming back to weather, is really somebody collecting that we had such a history of National Weather Service observation, and that data stream has been broken. And so Valdez Avalanche organization there has really tried hard to keep that weather station up and monitoring, and the improvements and stuff like that. This stuff is so important. You know, in 1980, my weather report was a facsimile map That was it. You know, if you know what a facsimile map is, and a satellite picture taken 24 hours ago. And we didn't have internet, but you have so much stuff available now, but you got to get the data into it to make it good.
Hi, Matt. This is Kyle Klaus. Glad you did the Tuesday Night History Talk tonight. Really appreciate hearing your voice, hearing your perspectives of the last 20 years of skiing, 20 plus years of skiing in Valdez. And I think that a lot of these conversations end up becoming pretty oriented about trying to be as objective as possible and describe kind of the approach, the method, the snow science, etc. And I was just wanting for a moment to pose to you the opportunity to geek out just from a purely sliding perspective, human sliding perspective. Do you want to tell us? Do you want to give us a moment to talk about what does the perfect day of skiing look like to you in Valdez?
Well, you know, the perfect day of skiing would just, you know, I'd say catcher's mitt top to bottom with powder. You know, right down the notch and then straight over the bump, not down the ridge, but just straight over the bump, all powder all the way down to the valley floor. You know, it was never about, you know, the steep would happen when it happens, but it doesn't happen all the time, as you all know. Everything's got to be just perfect. But boy, sometimes just doing 30, 35 degree powder for 4,000 feet on a pair of telemark skis when, you know, when you're in shape and your thighs were good and you could just fly all the way down without stopping, exhilarating to me. Most of the steep runs I did were very stressful. An example would be the Buoy Kawar out near Shoot Bay. I mean, I skied that, but it was a harebrained, very stressful adventure. It wasn't very fun. Leprechaun was fun, but I was totally exhausted by the time I got back to the car. So, you know, it's variable, but yeah, 4,000 foot powder runs on a pair of fat telly skis. Yeah, it's good.
Little snowpack that we've had kind of a weird pattern for the last 5-ish years or so. What are just easy, safe runs to be looking for when we drive the corridor? What comes to mind for just something easy, safe?
You know, it's really a challenge because, you know, whether we want to admit it or not, everything out there is avalanche terrain. I mean, it just is. I mean, there's some flats out there where people cluster, you know, but, you know, it's all really hazardous avalanche terrain. And so I don't, you know, most of your skiing is going to be restricted to just the common runs on Thompson Pass, unless you know, take a bump back somewhere and explore a new area. You know, hybrid ski, you know, is a good option to get into new zones and stuff like that, and have good backcountry skiing. But you know, it's hard for me to recommend something because everything is just it's hazardous. It's hazardous and complicated terrain. When you live there all the time, it doesn't seem like it because you just kind of get used to it. You know, like, oh yeah, it's just school bus. But you know, school bus can rip and bury the highway 15 feet deep right there. So you know, it's all really complicated terrain. It takes experience and just poking around carefully. Slope meter, you know, of course. People know I could talk an hour about slope meters, so I'm not going to go there.
For people who are interested in learning more about snow science and snow backcountry safety and making those assessments yourself, you should definitely sign up for a level 1 or a level 2 Avalanche training course. And you'll learn in those classes that we don't really ever try to describe an area as safe. It's kind of a misnomer, and it's really dangerous because it's variable. Imagine the beaches and surfing. There's not always the exact same wave. Waves come and go with the weather. It's the same thing with skiing. There are some areas that sometimes are perfectly safe, and a few conditions change with the weather, and then it's a completely different area. It's completely dangerous. And so there's a lot of variables at play. Take your avalanche safety education, and they will, the goal of that is to teach you to be able to identify for yourself what areas are safe and what aren't.
Yeah, avalanche courses, they've changed, if I can just elaborate on that, because I think those of us that came up with avalanche education in the 80s, when we went to the first class that night, we all left scared to death and never wanted to ski again because of the stories that the avalanche people would tell us from Utah, and Doug Fester would tell horror stories. And so you definitely left avalanche education courses pretty much scared of avalanche terrain. And I don't know how we can drive that fear in on top of the education module that people seem to adhere to pretty religiously these days. How to inject a little bit of fear into those courses with real life experiences and real emphasis. And a lot of avalanche, they might spend a little bit on fear, but I'm just saying you should spend a little bit more on fear. Yeah. I think one thing I've tried to do with my avalanche presentations over the year is try to think out of the box. And I think all my presentations try to do that, try to touch on other areas that aren't specifically in the mainstream of what's taught. And I try to bring a different perspective into it. So, yeah.
Matt, assuming the conditions were all right and everything was good to go, if you had to ski one line in the past right now, where do you think you'd go? This is Jeremy. I'll be with you, by the way. I'd ski it too.
Well, I'd probably like to return and ski the east core of Mount Francis again, boot up that and ski that. That was pretty delightful. That was pretty delightful. And I'd like to do Buoy Calor if it would have some good snow in it. But that north face of that east face of Mount Francis is pretty nice terrain. As far as the Port Valdez, I don't know, Jeremy, you got so much to choose from there. It's a real tough question.
I got to give you a little bit of help, but
yeah, I mean, even Goodwills, which I described in the relatively low risk, but you know how good that can be from top to bottom when you nail it. So I always really enjoyed South Odyssey Gully. It's kind of my little gymnasium there. I could always go in and get some quick lonely turns, and nobody bothered me in there. So I really liked having that gymnasium for a long time. And I if that was my backyard, another correlation is if you're a professional golfer, you're a real good golfer, and you have a house and you're right along the Pebble Beach one week, and then you go to the Masters course, and you have these beautiful golf courses you just rotate to all the time, and then suddenly you're not near those golf courses. You're near par threes now and stuff like that. So that's where you're at, Jeremy. So have fun with it, right?
Over the years, I have had this opportunity to learn and from you, and I think probably even maybe more importantly to get a very different perspective on the world as a result of what you have shared. While I may not ski some of those places where you've been, I won't. You have kind of opened those up to me. So when you work in the museum business and you have access to original material, it's really transformative. It makes you feel quite special that you get a chance to be in the presence of that. And so I guess that's what I'm saying is you've given me an opportunity to be in the presence of something that has been really transformative over the years. And I really, I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I take it very seriously, so thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Yes, thank you very much, Faith. Thank you, Valdez Museum and Historical Archives. Thank you very much from both Tabitha and I. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone who came out tonight. You know, we all have choices on how we want to spend our time. And so thank you so much for spending your evening with Matt and us at the museum. We really appreciate it. And wish you well in the coming year.
Yeah. Be safe, Valdez. No, be safer. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Matt.
Good night, folks.